Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is day 2 of the TIF Summit, a conversation about education and technology across the miles from Canada to Western New York. Today, we have a couple of more great speakers, Nina Calarco and Dan Armstrong. Before we begin, I just want to let you know if you hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to bring up a chat window or a chat box that you could ask questions, make comments, and add websites, anything like that. Keep in mind, this is going on for the rest of the week, so we've got 3 more days of great sessions, all up from 1 to 3, so please join us for those. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Nina Calarco. And Nina has been teaching at Newport for the past 15 years. It goes by fast, doesn't it, Nina? The majority of her career has been spent teaching math to 8th graders. And 4 years ago, she started teaching a course that she co-created called the Innovation Experience, or Innovation Experience. To follow Nina and connect, you can go to Twitter, and her handle is @NMC8255. Again, you'll be able to see all this on the website, and that's just bit.ly/TIF Summit, and that'll give you all the information that you need. So without further delay, here is Nina Calarco. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks, Andy and Melanie, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I have lots to share, so I'll just kind of jump right into content. But I know that if you have any questions, both Melanie and Andy will be monitoring that chat, so you can kind of jump in. So I'm going to, oops, I clicked something strange there, share my screen and jump right in. So when I was debating about what to chat with you about, I do a lot of non-traditional teaching, and I wanted to kind of get that out to folks. I decided to title the session Extreme Makeover Middle School Mathematics Edition. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Mel, I'm having a hard time seeing the screen, and is there a way I can change the setting?
To see the screen and what else?
Like myself, like the little picture, so I can see like what everybody else is seeing. I think I may have it. I might have lied. Or not. When I'm full screen, that's all I can see is my presentation. Okay, I'll flow with it.
Okay.
Okay. As Andy said, about 4 years ago, I started teaching a class called Innovation Experience, and it changed everything that I do in my traditional mathematics classroom. I teach Algebra 1 to accelerated 8th graders, and I teach some general classes as well. So I'm going to just kind of take you through some of the things that I do in my classroom, how that's morphed into this virtual teaching setting and distance learning that we're doing, so that you have some ideas about what you can do. I hear from a lot of my colleagues all the time that math is so much different than ELA and social studies and science and things like that, but a lot of what we do as technology integrators can be applied to math as well. On this journey, I've really kind of identified with the idea of being as empathetic as possible with my students, and that kind of drives everything that I do. So I joke around with some of my close friends and colleagues that it was the before and after, Nina 1.0 and Nina 2.0. So how really my teaching style and my strategies and things have changed. But before we get started, I would love to see who's kind of with us. So I'm going to hop out of this and paste this link to a Padlet in there so I can see who's here. And again, I've tried to identify different times where this is what I'd be doing with my students. So this would be kind of for community building. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Padlet, it's super easy. Let me see what's going on here. If I stop sharing for just a moment and pop this guy in the chat. So if you click on that link, and that will bring you to the Padlet, and I'll be able to hop over there as well and see what everybody's saying. I would love it if you would please just create a like little post-it. Tell us who you are, what you teach, and a word with a hashtag of how you're feeling today. So again, I do this with my students right away just to get a feeling for how things are going. And I'll hop back over and share my screen so that everybody can see. There's lots of things you can add. As you can see, I put my Bitmoji in there and changed the color background, which the kids love. For those of you who are new to Padlet, it's probably one of my favorite things to use inside the classroom, and I've even used it a little bit digitally as well. Lots of common words that I'm hearing: overwhelmed, tired. They're popping up quickly. Looks like we have some instructional coaches, technology, lots of technology integrators, which isn't a surprise. And people from both Western New York and Canada. Awesome. Perfect. So that gives me an idea of who the audience is. Let me pop back over to the presentation. Again, I'd open up pretty much every session with my students, and I'll get to that a little bit. So you're checking in with them in some way, shape, or form, and you'll see a couple examples of that kind of moving forward. So what is this shift that I'm talking about? Of my first 10 years of teaching was really traditional in nature. It was focused on me and my objectives and feeling like I had to fill my kids' brains with all of this math knowledge that they weren't super receptive to hearing. Majority of direct instruction with a little bit of group work and things like that, but the majority, again, was me teaching and them listening. Very obviously grade focused and high stakes test focused. I think I was a little risk averse. I definitely was having my students be risk averse because of those high stakes. And the technology that I used was pretty much just substitution from the SAMR model, where now I've switched to being brave enough to have things be student driven, which potentially looks a little chaotic at times. Tons of different varied strategies, which I'm going to share some of them with you today. My biggest metrics now are reflection and feedback from both the student and myself. And instead of being risk averse, I really encourage failure. It's the way that we get our students to take some really responsible risks and push their limits, and I've seen it in action. And my technology has definitely improved to the modification and redefinition level. What sparked this shift is probably 100% the most eye-opening portion of my career. About 4 years ago, I started a course with my principal at the time called Honors Project, which has now morphed into something called Innovation Experience, where students take an independent study with me for the summer before their 8th grade year, all the way through their 8th grade year. I meet with them once a week in like a music lesson style rotation. And it's completely student driven. It works on 21st century skills like leadership and teamwork and public speaking and innovation and design thinking, all these wonderful things. There are no standards and no grades. And that's when I kind of met up with Melanie, and Melanie had said to me, I kind of hear what you're doing and I kind of think it's genius hour. Do you want to collaborate? And this vision and mission and consortium was born. So she and I, along with this year, one of her colleagues, Molly, are going to be continuing our consortium for student empowerment through innovation. So you can see on the screen our mission and our vision and what we're trying to do. It's a group of educators from Western New York, and we meet about 4 times a year. We collaborate, we add all of the great things that we're doing, and I think approximately 10 to 12 schools in Western New York now are running their own programs, their own innovation experiences, or whatever they call their program, modeled after ours. So we're super excited and we want to continue to spread the word. So I said, I guess I'm going to try this in my classroom with standards and see how this works out. And it's kind of weasel its way in little pieces. And you're going to see, again, what does that look like now that we're talking no boundaries like in innovation, where I can pretty much have no curriculum or content. I can figure it out as I go. Where this is, again, more traditional for our state standards. I teach a college course, and this is the first thing that I tell my students. It's no longer my job as an educator to fill my students' minds, but to facilitate and inspire my students to take hold of their own learning. So I think I came out of college as a future teacher and said, it's my job to put all of this important information into their head, which we know isn't all that important in the big scheme of things. We want them to be able to kind of create and design and do all of those things. So that's really kind of stuck with me. So what does that look like? Here's a mind map of all of my craziness, trying to kind of explain it to you guys and get it all into one spot. So I've kind of color coded it. Those are only just some examples, especially on the technology integration, but I highlighted things like Book Creator and creating comic strips because those are pretty atypical of math teachers. I use them often with my kids at the end of units where they create books digitally, which have videos embedded in them. Comic strips are usually at the end of the year where they are recreating something as they're preparing for their final exams. Obviously, you saw me use Padlet. I'm a big proponent of WeVideo, both having my students create WeVideos and myself about their learning. You're going to hear a ton about SEL and what smiles and frowns are and how I reflect and what we do in just a little bit. And probably the most important thing to get kids to be a little less risk averse and to encourage that failure is really building a culture and a community. So that has lots of different looks. It's majority of the work is done in a community circle in my classroom where story-based learning is infused. Our school is moving toward a restorative justice practice for our discipline. So it's all going to tie in nicely. Another shift from before and after, the traditional way that I learned again as a college future teacher was that it was my job to model. So I do, then we would do together as a class, and then you do. It's pretty traditional. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about that. Where now it's shifted to the students do. So you do, explore a little. So the opening part of my lessons would be exploratory in nature. Then if need be, as I'm walking around and monitoring, a little redirect might be needed and we would do something together, followed by they do again. So you do, lots of discovery, them figuring things out with some guidance. And then at the very end, if necessary, I would do consensus or things I hear. So big shift in what probably a lot of us were taught. So typical day in my classroom would open with some sort of connector or check-in where I was seeing how the students are doing. This is one of my most favorite people that I follow on Twitter. His name is Monty Siri, and he introduced me to smiles and frowns. So for example, as I'm taking attendance, instead of just asking the kids to say here, we may or may not be in a circle, we would engage in smiles and frowns. So again, it's a quick check-in. Students have the option to say smile or frown, a quick one sentence or two about why, and they have the option to pass as well. So it might sound like this on a typical day. Smile, I have a soccer game tonight. I'm really looking forward to starting. Or frown, I got up late and almost missed my bus. And again, they have the option to pass. And it's so funny, as this kind of became a staple in my classroom, we call the kids who don't often share the chronic passers, but every now and again, they will share and they are super connected, even though they're not maybe sharing. And again, you really see the community kind of come alive when that happens. His website and Twitter handle are both there, and his motto is do, reflect, do better, which I think is awesome in this time when we're all probably being really critical of our teaching as we've shifted to distance learning. The second thing, which I'm going to model with you in just a moment, I've got from Sarah Vanderwerf. She is a math specialist somewhere out west. I'm not sure right now, I can't remember, where she uses something called stand-in talks, very similar to a think, pair, share, but the kids actually physically get up and move across the room. I love her goal of that students will see it before I show them and say it before I tell them. The one doing the talking is the one doing the learning. So we're hoping that we can create experiences where they figure it out before we have to tell them, and then they find out that it's useful. She has said that the best thing she ever did to get students to talk to one another were these stand-in talks. So I'm going to show you just a couple of different ones right from her website, and then I'm going to do one with you if you wouldn't mind. before doing any of these, I really work on creating norms, both for the circle that we're in or the activities that we're doing. So for stand and talk, the kids would have nothing in their hands. They're not allowed to lean or sit, which causes a little grumbling initially. They get up from their seat, or in the circle, they have to go 15 steps away from where they're at, which will encourage them to work with students that they don't normally work with. Pairs only. And then I'll prompt them. For the next 3 minutes, you will be talking about and give them a prompt and tell them about how many things I hope that they can find. They'll be given a card, usually like a half cardstock sheet of paper that has some sort of prompt on it. They are encouraged to continue to talk. There should be no gaps in their speaking. If they have to repeat something, they're allowed to, but the idea is that hopefully as things go on and they exhaust all of the simple things that they're noticing, they would be able to get into some really in-depth concepts. What's super interesting about these is there are no questions on any of the paper. I'm not asking students to solve a math problem or giving them a prompt. They literally are given something visual and asked to make as many observations as they can. So this would be some examples. You would give them possibly a card that would have the polygons and not polygons on them, and you'd ask them to make as many observations as they can, and then hopefully try to decipher, well, then what is a polygon and what isn't? And they come up with creating the definition in their own words instead of me just explaining it or telling them that. Again, connect representations. We know that that's a big standard over here in the US where things are shown in multiple representations. I've used that with like graphs, tables, and equations a lot. And she has an awesome resource for the visual patterns one. She has a link on her website to hundreds of visual patterns that you can use and work with your students. And again, if you take notice, there are no questions on any of those papers or anything for them really to solve. Two other types, convince me. You'd show kids a prompt like that and ask them to convince you which one is right, and obviously which one doesn't belong. Super interesting when you hear kids come up with reasoning as to why something like that doesn't belong. Really rich, there's no right answer. So again, kids are a little bit more willing to participate if they know there isn't going to be a right answer, as long as they can defend their choice, which is awesome. And again, that's the coolest thing about these, that things that I would never think of, I'm hearing because I'm walking around and monitoring while the kids are doing this. Again, I'm an enabler. Nina 1.0 is an enabler by nature. So to not be able to prompt and be nosy and get in on the conversations is difficult, but again, well worth it once you see what the kids are producing. So my favorite one that I do of hers is called a Notice and Wonder. So again, I'm going to hop out and throw this into the chat. It's another Padlet. I'm hoping that you will be able to do a Notice and Wonder. Again, I would do these in class, and I've also done them virtually. I'm going to put the picture back up in just a moment. There's a picture there, and I would ask that you create in the Padlet something that you notice or something you wonder, and each prompt should start out that way. So I notice there are people on two sides of a wall would be an example. I wonder why there are photographers, something like that. And then again, I would be doing this with the students myself. So there's the visual. If you want to just take a look at it for just a second, there is one in the Padlet, but this one's a little bit bigger so that you can kind of get the whole idea. Okay, so let me stop sharing. Again, I'll throw that into the chat. If you could hop over to this Padlet, and if you could put up a Notice or Wonder or both. This Padlet's set up into columns, so it's kind of set up for you. You can just keep adding, and if you want to scroll and see what other people are seeing, you can go down the column and kind of take a look. In the very first column, you'll notice if I was using this with students, I'd put the picture in there so that they can see it and it's in one spot. I have the article that I would encourage them to look at after as to what's really going on here after we do the Notice and Wonder, and a video that explains it and brings that picture to life. I noticed there are more people on one side than the other. Very good. I wonder why there's a wall separating them. I wonder why there are so many people on the left and on the right. The wonders are my favorite. It really gives insight into what the kids are kind of thinking. I wonder why they're not social distancing. I know that there are different aged people in the desert. I noticed what looks like seesaws. I wonder how they coordinated this. I really like how that person said, I noticed that something that looks like, I really focus on my kids that unless we're really sure, we don't want to say for certain what something is until we know. Awesome. I'll hop back over to the presentation and share with you guys again. While people are kind of finishing up, this was shared with me by Professor Drew Kahn, who is the gentleman that I work with in the story-based learning that I'll talk about in a minute. This is actually a wall at the Mexico-New Mexico border. An artist decided to kind of envision and capture this. So there are obviously people in Mexico and the US here, and those are photographers capturing it. So if you get a minute, take a look at the article. It's pretty cool. And again, this would be very apropos for what we have going on in the divide and things like that. So it would be something I'd use with my students to introduce what a notice and wonder is, something that's not content driven. So again, it's even less low stakes for the students so that they can feel like they can participate. And again, your notice and wonders were great. Sometimes they would start out and say, I see 3 teeter-totters, or I see 3 pink bars. Simple is okay. We just want the kids talking and getting used to each other. And when they know they're working with someone they're not super familiar with, building that community, they're okay to do it knowing that it's a really short activity. Like I said, 1 to 3 minutes tops, and then they can go back to their comfort zone. And that would then progress on to, after I've taught them and modeled with them the strategy, using the content that I'm doing. So these were 2 examples that I used with my students this year face to face. What do you notice? What do you wonder? So in the bottom right-hand corner, unit, so they've never done any conversions like that. So they start figuring it out, and there's not a lot going on. So when you give them 2 minutes or so, by the end of the 2 minutes, they really are kind of struggling, and they start noticing things that you wouldn't normally think that they would, instead of me just telling them, oh, there are 12 inches in a foot. They know that, but they don't quite understand why things are canceling. So it really is a good opener to the unit. And then in the top left, that's actually from her website, but I've used it. It is an introduction to graphing inequalities and things like that. And the kids have some familiarity with like linear equations when I use it. They pay attention to things probably better than adults and math teachers do, like the open circles and the closed circles, all the different colors of the shading. And again, I really want to point out there is no question there. So they really are just trying to observe what's going on and figure some things out before we have to tell them. Remember her motto, I want them to see it before I show them, and I want them to say it before I tell them. So hopefully you get a little idea about what a notice and wonder is. This then had to shift, obviously, with the pandemic to how I apply it in a distance learning setting. So because I've established it in my classroom, they're used to it. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall if I don't have them in class first. I'll have to be creative on what I do. But I can show you just a couple examples. This one's going to pop out. Again, this was probably beginning of April when I used this with my students. They have no idea what a polynomial is or isn't, and I asked them to do a notice and wonder with this and try to, again, come up with on their own essentially a definition for what polynomials are and aren't. So I reiterated them in 2 spots. I have down here, what are your top 3 notices and wonders? And in your own words, what would be a rule or a definition that you could teach somebody between the difference between the 2? And those same things are located in a Google form for them to fill out. I know Derek shared this yesterday. It's been life-changing for me in the virtual world, but the idea at the end where they can add a file. So I asked the kids to upload a quick video of themselves answering the question. Again, they were awesome and super insightful into what these things are. Even if they didn't have the definitions perfect, they were great. And again, so much better than me just telling them what the difference is. They took some vested interest in their own learning and kind of figured that out, which is awesome. Another example was my very rudimentary first attempt at making some of my own videos at home. So again, this was early on in the pandemic switch. So please no judging if you watch any of this video at the end. Again, this would be posted in the kids' Google Classrooms. I would give them, again, a prompt and tell them all this. They don't know this vocabulary really well just yet. Monomials, polynomials, binomials. So hopefully just modeling it, they'll kind of pick up on it, make 3 observations similar to notices, and it transfers over that language. And for both, what do you do when you're multiplying exponents? And you can kind of get a feel for it. At the end, I would, there's a video here, if you click on it later on, that takes you to a Loom video where I first figured this out. And then just a little bit of follow-up practice and homework, which is really, really minimal in my normal classroom and just as minimal pretty much in the virtual setting as well. I don't want to inundate them. Again, very different probably than many of my colleagues. And then the last example has a video of me teaching how to trinomial factor from a distance, which was a challenge. And this is the one that actually worked out the best with my students. During the video, there's segments where I pause it and ask them to come back to this document and do the notice and wonders. I then reveal a few in the video after. So they made comments about why are some blue, why are some red? I noticed there are all have 3 terms, things like that. Then before they know how to do this, I asked them to cut and paste these factored forms into the trinomial boxes. I would say 95% accuracy. And again, I'm not sure if they like foiled or double distributed these out or if they just guessed based on their intuition. So I asked them below if they could describe their thinking on how they came up with it without really kind of some formal instruction. The video would then go on to explain how to do it. And then they would have, again, a minimal amount on the end where I'd be able to go into this document then from the classroom, give them some feedback. Most of my feedback is, hey, check out letters C and G. You made some errors there. See if you can figure them out. And again, when they go back in, they're usually able to, so with very, very little prompting. So again, that's how it kind of shifted, again, having that in the classroom. Go to the virtual distance learning. Things that I noticed after really improving the discourse in the room and really using the notice and wonder, I did an action research project on it this year to really see what it would do to benefit my classroom. It really improved classroom culture. I saw a lot of what we were doing in the moment, in the like notice and wonders or the stand-in talks, carry over into other aspects of the classroom. Students were using the vocabulary, students were pairing up with one another, people they wouldn't normally partner with. The complexity of their questions and their attention to detail improved significantly. I was able to recognize more misconceptions, so reasons why I thought kids were getting things wrong became a lot more apparent because I could hear them talking more. Obviously, there's much more engagement because they're all doing it at once instead of just calling on one student at a time or one group at a time. And again, the overall peer interactions improved as a result. And the last kind of strategy I'm going to share with you today is a little bit difficult to kind of put into words, but it's something called story-based learning. Again, Professor Drew Kahn at Buffalo State through the Anne Frank Project. He's a theater professor, and he takes you on a journey of bringing story to life in your classroom. Again, life-changing, a big, long training that we went through with him, and then he stays on board and works with you for the entire semester. Due to everything that happened, he's even going to stay on with us in the fall. So take a look at that if you're interested. I can definitely give you some more info on it, but I'll try to sum up as best I can. We use the word story loosely, and we use it to describe a lot of different things. One small activity we're doing could be a story, a big story about what's going on right now, and then what you traditionally think of as stories. So this kind of sums it up. It's a way for us to use stories as vehicles for community building, conflict resolution, and identity exploration. It's all modeled after Anne Frank. The idea is that everybody has a story that's very important and matters, and together we create a village or a community, and there are norms and ways to do this. He really helps you out and has like some pre-prescribed activities so that you can start to do this. And again, you create norms for your village. The overall impression is when we're in the circle, it's we before me, meaning you put the collective before yourself and you have to continue to tell the story no matter what. There's a warm-up routine. So while you're in the circle, there are some activities, things called Pass the Pulse, and a whole different series that he would run you through. I would say it probably takes, once you get it down, about 6 minutes. So I would open up my classroom with this routine, and it's really just kind of getting the kids ready to do the work that we're doing. I am not very artistic or at all into theater, so a lot of people are a little turned off initially when they think that it's theater, but it really isn't. It's really just having the kids use their bodies to tell these important concepts. You go through a process called heartstorming with the kids on different topics, and then you heartstorm with content. So the idea is we would build stories together, and I have some videos that'll probably do it a little bit more justice, but we do it again with social emotional things like I was just showing you with that wall, but also weave it into academic content. And he's right there kind of alongside you while you're doing it. So we spend some time in the beginning. It's really important to build those norms and expectations. So on the left here, you're looking at a picture of what my two classes created as their norms. So how it kind of works is I co-teach with a teacher, Elizabeth Buck. She's a science teacher on my team, and we share the same students. So she was able to come up with a rule, I was able to come up with a rule, and the students came up with the other three. So again, if you look at some of these words that you're showing, we agree that we will show dignity for each other and our work. That was created by a student. We agree that that's and that we before me. In the circle, days in the circle, that was mine. Again, talking about privacy and how important it is for kids to feel like they're in a safe space. So that was created. And then on the picture on the right, that is a group of my girls telling a story. So if you look closely, they are telling a story right here on exponent laws. So there were different groups in the room, and they each had a different law, product law, quotient law, things like that. So if you notice, all of the students that look like their arms are crossed in front of them are X's, and the exponents are on the top. There's an equal sign, and they spent some time figuring out how they were going to use their bodies to tell this law. Again, the best part about it is I get to snoop in on their conversations and hear what they're saying and see them wrestling and trying to figure it out and find a way to represent it. So again, it's been life-changing in my classroom. And that's the story they told. They told the story of, I think it might be the quotient law here. Here is another example. Again, I spoke to co-teaching with Elizabeth Buck, the science teacher on my team. We combined our students for this period, and they are telling a story here as well. I'll let you watch. All right, start guessing. Start guessing. Don't injure Alex. Remember, we're all safe in the village, physically and emotionally.
He's the left rock. Alex is the rock. Josh is wind, and Casey's water, right?
And what's Owen though? Is Owen? Owen's gravity. Owen's gravity. Yeah.
Awesome. So it was a lesson on weathering and erosion. The students broke up into small groups, went out and had to figure out what their story was going to be. And as you can hear, the other students who weren't a part of that group are in the back trying to figure out what was going on. And again, they were putting words to these pretty difficult concepts. Liz decided that she wanted to have a story-based learning lesson on this because this is one of the most frequent questions missed on the state assessment. They really had a hard time differentiating between weathering and erosion. And again, now that they're putting these stories into their bodies and acting them out, chances are that the retention would hopefully be better. Here's another example. This one's short, of all of the kids individually in their groups telling their own stories before they came back together, where we kind of debrief. The name of this activity, the one that you just saw in this one, is called Machine. So they're trying to find a way to make a machine that works over and over again to display their concepts.
This is amazing. It's like I can't believe they're
So again, full engagement, even from some of our reluctant boys that I wasn't expecting would be super into this, change my mind. Again, we're snooping and walking around and seeing what they're saying and trying to figure it out. And everybody's engaged in the activity so that it's not just we're waiting for one group to go and not the other. Since we moved to the distance learning, Professor Khan stayed on board with us, and he talked about how we would do this, especially if in the fall we aren't back face to face. He talks about stories and how obviously the Star Wars saga is a perfect example. So we met with our students once a week on Fridays during our normal time where Mr. Khan would be with us, and we tried to process a lot of what was going on around us in the world. We heartstormed. So again, we made a list of all the words that the kids were feeling and how they were doing it. We kind of color coded it here. And then from there, they kind of picked their like top 10 or top 5, whatever it is. So the ones that are highlighted are the ones that we focused on. And we started to build a story kind of virtually. What will our theme be? And we tell the kids it's like a hashtag or what we would put on a bumper sticker. And this is a whole process that we go through. So they really stuck to this idea of weathering the storm. They use the analogy that the pandemic and the virus was a storm, and that those characters would kind of emerge from there. We talk about story structures, obviously the different types that there are, the hero's journey. This is the story structure used by Pixar. Once upon a time there was, every day blank. And because of that, and because of that, and because of that, and you kind of see the characters go through that process. So they came up with some ideas and characters for, again, protagonists, the sun, the rain, the clouds, this idea of the storm actually being it. So it's, again, a way for them to process. So there's lots of different applications and lots of different ways that this can be used, but it was possible, and we continue to do it through Zoom and had the kids tell their stories in their small little screens. We still went through the warm-ups that we would do in the classroom. So I shared a lot with you. I want to kind of just bring it back and go through a typical day in my classroom. Again, it would open with some sort of opening connection, whether it be in a circle, whether it be through attendance, depending on what the activity is. The smiles and frowns, an opener with within the circle with story-based learning. It would then jump to student-centered activities, maybe some mini lessons from me if need be, with some direct instruction on some of that. I'm not going to lie. There are definitely days that if you walked into my classroom, it would look like a typical math classroom and I'm doing some direct instruction. It just isn't the focus and the main method that I use anymore. I have students grouped in different types of groups with one another, and that's kind of shifting each day. So trying to keep them on their toes. Throughout the class period, there'd be opportunities for feedback after the class period using Google Forms and things like that, where there's only one of me and lots of them. So I really focus on and do some direct instruction in the beginning of the year on how to give good peer feedback, how to be real honest with yourself and give yourself some good feedback. And then obviously I'm sharing with the students as well. I assess in little small chunks using reflections with the students and what I call minis that are similar to exit ticket style types of assessments. We do traditional tests and things like that. But these little minis are really what kind of keeps on track. When you are brave enough to let your students kind of take the reins and go with it, it's often difficult to really get a handle on where they're at. This idea of encouraging risk and failure, I've seen has been the toughest for my highest achieving students who would prefer to be in a more traditional setting and regurgitate information back out. So again, you have to be creative on how you create those opportunities for them and do some hand holding, especially in the beginning, so that you can kind of build some trust there. It's difficult to manage the time, but in an ideal world, I would close in a circle as well, check back in with the students, see how they're doing, go over some of the misconceptions maybe that I was hearing from smaller groups as they were kind of apart, if we didn't get a chance to address that in the moment. And again, minimal homework. Again, the thought is they're processing and doing a lot of the work with you, that they don't need as much practice on their own. I give an example here of what some feedback might look like. When I'm asking for feedback, I know that's sometimes difficult. If we put the question out there, we have to be ready for the responses from the students. So this is a question that I put up right after the first video that I made for the students. We use something in our math class called e-math instruction. Kirk Weiler is a New York State teacher, and he has full free curriculums out there. And from time to time, we use his actually workbook, but from time to time we would watch his videos as well, or I would do like a flipped model. So in this session, I'm asking the kids for some feedback on my first video so I could see what they said. By and large, it was positive, and you can see that some of the responses from the students are interesting. So I thought it was very good. I watched all of it, but only needed the first 4.5 minutes. Which I was super impressed with. And I wrote back to that student and said, it's okay if you only needed the first 4.5 minutes, you really didn't have to watch the whole thing. But again, it's those overachievers who like to make sure they're doing everything that they can. The student below talked a lot about, and it was a common theme, hearing it from you, you're our teacher, it made more sense, which we all know that those types of videos, when they come from the person that's instructing, is better anyway. Again, I started out at around the 20-minute mark with the videos and weaseled it down. This one was 14. I found that the golden amount for me is 10 to 12 minutes, again, after listening to the students' feedback. Where to go from here? I'm hoping to find a way to continue this constructivist approach and be even more of a risk taker. Now I feel like we have nothing to lose. I can blame it on the pandemic, but to really be student centered so I can hear what the students are saying, to incorporate more of the design thinking that I'm using in innovation class with my students in math class, and incorporate as much project-based learning with lots of what I've learned from the Genius Hour through these standards into my classroom next year, virtually or face-to-face. Right on time here, I'm seeing. So I'll hop back out of this. And I'll put this bit.ly right into the chat so that you can have access to the slides if you would like them. Oops, stop sharing. I'll put that in at the end, but are there any questions? I know I did a lot of chatting and it's again weird just speaking to an audience that isn't really there on my screen.
Everyone must be very captivated. It's been rather quiet. So your class periods are 40 minutes, right?
So our traditional class periods are 40 minutes. But when I co-teach with Liz, we have, it would be as if I have a math lab every other day. So I would have a 40-minute session one day and then 2 40-minute sessions the next day, but we break it up so that I see those kids 60 minutes a day. So our Regents kids have us each for an hour every day, which does make a lot of what I shared a little bit easier to implement because we have that extra 20 minutes with them. But it definitely can be done in a traditional 40-minute class period. Again, just smaller chunks of time.
If anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat. Wait time is weird. For students you've had with special needs, which strategies do you find most effective?
The notice and wonders have been really effective with them, because again, when they're working with their partner, they're not in front of their whole class, and they really get some think time and wait time and partnering up with that. And again, they get to share out. We debrief right after we do the notice and wonders. We make a list, and each group has to share out a notice or a wonder. So they know it's coming, and they have that wait time and that think time to be able to come up with what they think is their best notice and wonder. They also have shined in the story-based learning. So for our students who are super high energy, don't like the traditional model, don't like to be told to sit down and shut up, essentially, they find a way to just channel all of that energy into the circle time and what they're doing. And again, oftentimes those students with some of those behavior issues and things like that are mistaken as they don't get it, or they're not smart, and this is really a way for them to shine. So again, it's a little harder for the more traditional learners, but again, working on building that community and relying on those village expectations that the story that we're telling collectively as a group is what's most important, and we can't not tell that story. We have a duty to do that. It's goofy initially. It's uncomfortable. We went through the training and had to do it ourselves, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, there's no way. But when you stay the course and you really do implement it, those students really do shine in a setting like that.
I'm also going to just jump in and say I've spent quite a bit of time in Nina's classroom. So I would say the strategy that I see her use the most, and she spoke to it, is empathy. And so I think that she will personalize whatever activity she is doing or lesson she is teaching to each student to meet their needs, depending on what those needs are. So there's definitely a lot of personalization going on. So let me just, so thank you. This was wonderful. Definitely want to use the notice and wonder approach. What's one positive from now you will take to the fall?
So there are about 4 teachers who have started doing story-based learning, went through the training and really started adapting it. I'm in a fairly traditional school in nature, and again, as a result, people have been forced to do some of this, and I've gotten a lot of positive comments and feedback from my colleagues. So what I'm hoping is that this culture shift that we're talking about just in our maybe like the classrooms that are doing this is going to spread. When we hear these students who haven't had a voice for really long and have again been told to sit and be quiet and really are oppressed, when they then have to go to these other classrooms and they're like, why can't we do this here? It's heartbreaking. So everybody has their own approach, and I'm not trying to force anything on them, but if we can work together, one of the positives I'm hoping is that out of desperation, we're going to become closer as a team. And obviously at the middle school level, it's super important that this will continue to grow for our students.
Tons of great ideas. Thank you for sharing. And do you teach any ESL students? If so, how do you find that they work in the groups?
Our ESL population is minimal, but we do have some students. Again, I have a student right now who is fluent in Russian, and initially it was difficult for him to kind of process what was going on. But once he got the hang of it, again, it was almost as if when the kids are working through these models like machine, there's another one called museum, where you would send a group of students or a student out into the hallway. they'd come back in and everybody would be acting as a statue in a museum on the concept you're teaching. So if you were teaching the Industrial Revolution, everybody would be a statue. And if the kids coming back in, if it was like a vocab word or something that you're trying to figure out, they would try to identify it. And if they don't, then you put the statues to like a constant movement. So if they were like scooping with a shovel or something, they would continue to do it. So a lot of those things are universal. Once the students who are having a difficulty with the language can see those motions and things like that, even if they can't put a word to it, again, it's like you're putting it into their body. So again, it takes a little bit more time up front with them, but they do catch on very quickly. And again, it shows you that they understand concepts, and it's not just the language barrier it's causing them to potentially not get the test scores that they want and things like that.
And then another thank you. All right, if there are not any other questions, let me reveal myself here. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, then we are set to take a break.